The lipstick on his collar wasn't mine, and the woman wearing it was my own sister, paid by my mother-in-law to destroy my marriage. That's how I discovered my husband wasn't just being unfaithful. He was being hunted. And so was I. My name is Ava Laurent Campbell. I married into the Campbell family 3 years ago, wealthy old money types, who smiled through their teeth and spoke in coded insults. My mother-in-law Lillian had a talent for making observations that cut like glass. Ava, dear, you have such unique perspectives on family traditions. It's refreshing how you don't let social expectations constrain you. David's father would have found your approach to entertaining quite modern. I thought she hated me because I was middle class, because my parents were immigrants who built their restaurant from nothing, because I didn't know which fork to use for the fish course. I was wrong. She hated me because I made her son happy. Because David looked at me the way he'd never looked at the parade of debutantes she'd introduced him to. Because for the first time in his 32 years, he'd chosen someone for himself. She didn't want to share his loyalty, and she was willing to pay for exclusive access. David and I had built something beautiful together. Not just our marriage, but our company, a tech startup that helped small businesses manage their finances. I handled the legal side, the contracts, the incorporation papers. David was the visionary, the one who could see 3 steps ahead in the market. We worked 16-hour days in our cramped apartment office, surviving on takeout and dreams. When we finally moved into the Campbell Estates guest house, I thought we'd made it. I thought his family had finally accepted me. I should have known better. The first sign came on a Tuesday in October. Emily showed up at our door with 2 suitcases and red-rimmed eyes. "I just need somewhere to stay for a few weeks," she said, not quite meeting my gaze. "The divorce is complicated. My sister and I hadn't been close since college. She'd always been the prettier one, the charming one, the one who could walk into a room and own it. I was the serious one, the one who studied while she partied, the one who built while she flirted. But she was still my sister, and she looked broken. "Of course you can stay," I said, ignoring the way David's jaw tightened. "The guest room is yours." Lillian appeared within the hour as if summoned by invisible signals. "Emily, darling, what a lovely surprise. You simply must stay in the main house. The guest cottage is so cramped. I insist." Emily's tears dried remarkably quickly. "That's so generous, Mrs. Campbell, if you're sure it's no trouble." "None at all. We have so much catching up to do." I watched them walk toward the main house, Emily's hand resting on Lillian's arm, like they'd known each other for years instead of minutes. Something cold settled in my stomach, but I pushed it down. Emily was hurting. Lillian was being kind. I was being paranoid. The changes started small. David began staying late at the office. Not unusual, we were launching a new product. But when I offered to bring him dinner, he'd already eaten. When I suggested we work together on the marketing strategy, he'd already handled it. "You don't need to worry about every detail, Ava. Trust me." Trust, such a fragile word. Then came the nervous glances. The way his phone buzzed constantly during dinner, face down on the table. The way he'd step outside to take calls, voice too low for me to hear. "Business," he'd say when I asked. "You know how it is." But I didn't know, because he'd stopped telling me. The perfume was the final piece. Floral and expensive, clinging to his shirts like a signature. It wasn't mine. I wore vanilla and sandalwood warm scents that reminded me of my mother's kitchen. This was jasmine and roses, delicate, feminine, familiar. I'd smelled it before in the main house, in Emily's room. Some wives would have confronted their husbands immediately, thrown accusations like grenades and hoped for the best. But I'd learned something from years of contract negotiations. Information is power, and power requires patience. So I waited, I watched, I listened. Emily had transformed during her stay. The broken woman who'd arrived with tear-stained cheeks had been replaced by someone radiant. Her hair gleamed, her clothes were new. Her laugh echoed through the main house at all hours. She joined us for dinner every night, now invited by Lillian. She'd sit across from David, their conversation flowing like wine. They shared inside jokes, discussed books I'd never heard of, debated art, with the casual expertise of people who'd grown up surrounded by beauty. I felt like a stranger at my own table. Emily has such refined tastes. Lillian would observe, cutting her meat with surgical precision. It's wonderful having someone around who truly appreciates culture. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Someone unlike me, but I smiled. I nodded. I played the role of the oblivious wife while my world shifted beneath my feet. The truth lived in Lillian's study. I'd always been good with locks, a skill learned from childhood pranks with Emily, actually. The irony wasn't lost on me as I picked the antique desk drawer that had been calling to me for weeks. Inside, nestled between family documents and stock certificates, I found the evidence. A check, made out to Emily Laurent, for $50,000. The memo line read, "For your discretion and continued cooperation." The date was 3 weeks after her arrival. My hands shook as I photographed it with my phone. Then I kept searching. More checks, smaller amounts paid out weekly like a salary. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills for 2. And at the bottom of the pile, a handwritten note in Lillian's precise script. Remember, the goal is to create distance between them, not to create a scandal that could harm the family name. Subtle influence is more effective than dramatic gestures. Once she leaves him, we can manage the company transition quietly. The room spun around me. This wasn't just about destroying my marriage. This was about stealing my life's work. I photographed everything. Then I locked the drawer and walked calmly back to my cottage, where I sat on my kitchen floor and cried for exactly 10 minutes. Then I got to work. The first step was securing my future. I opened a new bank account at a different institution, one where the Campbell name carried no weight. I transferred my personal savings, my share of our joint accounts, everything that was legally mine. The second step was protecting my professional interests. As the company's chief legal officer, I had access to all our corporate documents. What I found made my blood sing with vindication. David might have been the visionary, but I'd been the architect. Every contract, every partnership agreement, every piece of intellectual property had been structured with my input. And in many cases, they'd been filed under both our names or sometimes just mine, the startup we'd built together. According to the incorporation papers I'd filed 2 years ago, I owned 51%. David had been so focused on the big picture that he'd let me handle the boring paperwork. Now that boring paperwork was about to save my life. I spent the next 2 weeks documenting everything. Every asset, every client relationship, every piece of code our small team had developed. I created backup files, secured offline copies, and quietly transferred key partnerships to my personal control. Meanwhile, I played the perfect wife. I smiled at dinner. I laughed at David's jokes. I complimented Emily's new dresses and asked Lillian for her opinion on redecorating ideas. But I also hired Marcus Webb, the best private investigator money could buy. "I need proof," I told him during our coffee shop meeting. "Video, audio, whatever you can get. And I need it to be legally admissible." Marcus was a former cop with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Are you sure you want to see this? Sometimes the truth is harder to live with than the uncertainty." "I'm already living with the truth," I said. "I just need evidence." He delivered it 3 days later. A flash drive containing 2 hours of surveillance footage from the Meridian Hotel downtown. David and Emily in the lobby, their body language speaking volumes. David and Emily in the elevator, his hand on her lower back. David and Emily entering room 1247, not emerging until the next morning. I watched it once sitting alone in my car in an empty parking lot. Then I drove home and cooked dinner like nothing had changed. Because nothing had changed. Not yet. The confrontation had to be perfect. Not just satisfying, but strategic. I needed witnesses. I needed documentation. I needed them to understand that I wasn't the naive little wife they'd been manipulating. I planned it for a Saturday night. Family dinner, Lillian's favorite tradition. I spent the afternoon cooking David's favorite meal, braised short ribs, with rosemary potatoes, green beans from Lillian's garden, and chocolate soufflé for dessert. I set the table with the good china-lit candles, opened expensive wine. Emily arrived wearing a new dress. Silk probably cost more than my first car. She kissed my cheek like we were still sisters. "This smells amazing, Ava. You're such a wonderful cook." David appeared in his best suit, the one I'd bought him for our anniversary. He kissed my forehead absently, already reaching for the wine. Lillian swept in wearing pearls and judgment, surveying my table setting with critical eyes. "How lovely, dear. Though I do think the roses might be a bit much. Sometimes simplicity is more elegant." I smiled and poured the wine. "You're probably right. I'm still learning." Dinner conversation flowed like a well-rehearsed play. Business talk, carefully edited to exclude any details that might concern me. Art discussion that showcased Emily's expensive education. Family memories that predated my existence. I played my role perfectly. The dutiful wife, slightly out of her depth, but trying so hard to fit in. When dessert was served, I excused myself to get the coffee. Instead, I retrieved 3 gift boxes from my bedroom closet. "I have something for everyone," I announced, setting the elegant packages on the table. "Call it an early Christmas." Lillian smiled indulgently. "How thoughtful, dear." Emily looked genuinely curious. "You didn't have to open them together." I suggested, settling back into my chair with my wine glass. "I want to see your faces." They lifted the lids simultaneously. Lillian's face went white. Emily made a sound like she was choking. David's wine glass slipped from his fingers, red spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Inside each box was a different piece of evidence. For Lillian, copies of her checks and the handwritten note. For Emily, screenshots of her bank deposits and hotel receipts. For David, still frames from the surveillance video clear as daylight. The silence stretched like a held breath. Finally, Lillian found her voice. "Ava, this is the truth," I said calmly, taking a sip of wine. "The truth about my sister who took $50,000 to seduce my husband. The truth about my mother-in-law who orchestrated this whole charade because she couldn't stand losing control over her son. And the truth about my husband who was weak enough to fall for it all." Emily's tears started then, but they looked different from the ones she'd cried when she arrived. These were tears of panic, not pain. "Ava, you don't understand. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like," I interrupted. "And I have 2 hours of hotel surveillance footage to prove it." David finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "How long have you known? Long enough to protect myself." I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick folder. "Long enough to secure my 51% ownership of our company. Long enough to transfer our major client contracts to my personal control. Long enough to document every asset we've built together." Lillian's shock was transforming into fury. "You little..." "Careful." I warned, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. You're already looking at potential fraud charges for conspiracy to interfere with a marriage. Don't add defamation to the list." The room erupted then. Emily sobbing, David shouting, Lillian threatening lawsuits and social destruction. But their voices seemed to come from very far away. I stood up, slowly smoothing my dress. "The divorce papers will be filed Monday morning," I announced. "Emily, you're no longer welcome in this house. David, you have until next Friday to remove your belongings from the cottage. Lillian," I paused, looking at the woman who'd tried to destroy me. "Thank you. You taught me that family isn't about blood or money or social position. It's about choosing to protect the people you love. You chose to protect your own interests. I choose to protect mine." I walked toward the door, then stopped. "Oh, and the company, it's mine now. Legally, completely, irreversibly mine. I'll be changing the name, the location, and the entire corporate structure. Your son is welcome to apply for a position, but I'm afraid the culture I'm building won't be a good fit for people who lack integrity." The last thing I heard as I closed the door was Lillian screaming about lawyers and consequences and family honor. 6 months later, I'm writing this from my new office in the city. The company, now called Phoenix Financial Solutions, has tripled in revenue. We've expanded our team, launched new products, and signed partnerships with 3 major corporations. I live alone in a downtown loft, with floor-to-ceiling windows and no family photos. My team respects me. My clients trust me. My bank account reflects the value I create. Lillian did try to sue me, just as I'd predicted. She claimed emotional distress defamation and conspiracy to defraud the Campbell family of their rightful business interests. The judge reviewed my evidence, all of it, including audio recordings I hadn't mentioned during our dinner confrontation, and dismissed her case with prejudice. Then he suggested she might want to consider how her own actions could be construed as criminal conspiracy. She hasn't contacted me since. Emily sent letters for months. Apologies, explanations, pleas for forgiveness. She claimed she never meant to hurt me, that Lillian had manipulated her, that she was desperate, and made terrible choices. Maybe that's even true. But impact matters more than intent, and some betrayals cut too deep to heal. I donated her letters to my shredder unopened. David tried a different approach. He showed up at my office one Tuesday afternoon looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said, standing in my doorway like a penitent. "But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but mild curiosity. How had I ever thought this man was worth building a life with? "Love isn't enough," I told him. "Trust is the foundation. Without it, love is just a pretty word people use to justify their selfishness." He left without arguing. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd started his own consulting firm. It's struggling. Some women cry when their world falls apart. Others drink or shop or throw themselves into meaningless relationships. Me, I rebuild. I rebuild stronger, sharper, and completely on my own terms. I've learned that betrayal, while devastating, can also be liberating. When the people you trusted most prove themselves unworthy, you discover reserves of strength you never knew you possessed. I've learned that revenge, when executed with precision and patience, tastes better than any wine. Most importantly, I've learned that the best way to defeat people who underestimate you is to exceed every expectation they never had. The Campbell family thought they could manipulate me because I was an outsider, because I was young, because I was kind. They were wrong on all counts. I wasn't an outsider, I was the future they were too blind to recognize. I wasn't naive, I was strategic. And I wasn't weak, I was simply choosing my battles. Now, when I walk into boardrooms full of men who think they can intimidate me, when I negotiate with investors who assume I'll settle for less, when I face any challenge that requires both intelligence and steel. I remember that dinner. I remember the look on their faces when they realized I'd been 10 steps ahead the entire time. I remember the sound of my own voice, calm and controlled, as I dismantled their carefully laid plans. And I smile, because some lessons can only be learned through fire, and I emerged from those flames transformed. The woman who walked out of that dining room 6 months ago was someone new. Someone who understood that the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's construction. Building something so magnificent that everyone who doubted you has no choice but to watch you succeed. My name is Ava Laurent, CEO of Phoenix Financial Solutions, and I'm just getting started.